The emerald locket glinted under the classroom lights. My wife's stolen heirloom, now dangling from our daughter's teacher's neck. My phone buzzed with Mike's distraction call as I snapped the photo, my fingers trembling. Then the black SUV roared into the parking lot, tires screeching, engine gunning straight for me. I slammed the gas pedal, my car fishtailing as the chase began. My daughter's face flashed in my mind. Was she part of this? The envelope in her hands, the cabin ahead, and the truth waiting to unravel me. The humidity in the cramped hallway of Oak Ridge Academy clung to David Miller's skin like a wet shroud. He adjusted his silk tie, the fabric smooth against his throat, but it felt more like a noose than a fashion statement. Every time he climbed the stairs to the second floor, the ritual began. 1, 2, 3. He counted under his breath, his shoes clicking rhythmically against the polished wood. By the time he reached the landing at 24, his heart was hammering a frantic tattoo against his ribs. He wasn't here for a typical parent-teacher conference. He was here because the structural integrity of his life was showing cracks he couldn't ignore. He stepped into the classroom, the scent of excessive floor wax and cloying lemon cleaner biting at the back of his throat. Sarah Jenkins sat behind a desk cluttered with ungraded essays, her wire-rimmed glasses catching the overhead fluorescent light. She didn't smile. She simply stared, her eyes unblinking, as if she were measuring the weight of his soul. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice carrying the frost of a permanent winter. "Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss regarding Maya's progress." David didn't hear her. His gaze was locked on her throat. There, resting against her collarbone, was a shimmering emerald locket. The gold filigree was unmistakable, a delicate vine-like pattern that David had designed himself for his wife, Elizabeth. The same locket Elizabeth had claimed was ripped from her neck by a mugger 3 months ago. The air in the room suddenly felt thin, as if the oxygen were being metered out by a hidden valve. He felt the cold bite of the chair's metal frame as he sat down, his mind racing to calculate the distance between this lie and the truth. "The locket," David said, his voice a low, mechanical rasp. "It's quite unique." Sarah's hand drifted upward, her fingers tracing the emerald with a slow, deliberate motion. "A gift," she replied, leaning in until David could smell the stale coffee on her breath. "From someone who truly appreciates the value of silence. Now, shall we look at Maya's grades? She seems distracted lately, almost as if she's carrying a weight she wasn't built to hold." David's thumb hovered over the side of his smartphone, hidden in the shadow of his mahogany briefcase. He needed proof. He needed a blueprint of this betrayal before the whole structure collapsed. He felt the vibration of a text message in his pocket, a prearranged signal. Right on cue, the heavy silence of the hallway was shattered by the booming, jovial roar of Michael Davis. "David, are you in there?" Michael's voice echoed through the door, followed by the heavy thump-thump of his deliberate stride. Michael burst into the room, his barrel-chested frame filling the doorway. "Pardon the intrusion, Miss Jenkins, but we have a crisis at the firm. A literal leak. The blueprints for the Riverside project are soaking wet." Sarah turned her head toward the door, her sharp, bird-like profile etched against the whiteboard. In that split second of diverted attention, David acted. He slid his phone out, the lens clicking silently as he captured 3 high-resolution images of the locket. The green stone flared in the digital preview, a bright, accusing eye. He slid the phone back into his pocket just as Sarah turned back, her eyes narrowing behind her lenses. "We're done here, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "I think you've seen everything you need to see." David stood, his legs feeling like lead pipes. "Yes," he murmured, counting the steps back to the door. 1, 2, 3. He didn't look back. He needed to get to the parking lot. He needed the open air, even if it was thick with the coming storm. The Oak Ridge parking lot was a vast expanse of gray asphalt, washed out by high-intensity LED security lights that turned every shadow into a bottomless pit. David reached his sedan, his fingers trembling as he fumbled with the key fob. The chirp of the locks echoed in the stillness. He climbed in, the smell of expensive leather doing nothing to soothe the cold knot in his stomach. As he shifted into reverse, a pair of blinding white eyes snapped open in his rearview mirror. A black SUV, heavy and silent as a hearse, lunged from a darkened stall. David slammed on the brakes, the tires screaming against the pavement. The SUV didn't stop. It swerved, aiming for his driver's side door. David floored the accelerator, the engine's roar drowning out the subsonic hum of his own rising panic. He tore out of the lot, the gates of the academy blurring past. The chase hit the suburban streets like a physical blow. Thump, 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 thump. The rhythmic pounding of his tires over the expansion joints of the road sounded like a panicked heartbeat. The SUV was a relentless shadow, its tinted windows reflecting nothing but the flickering streetlights. David gripped the steering wheel until the plastic groaned. He took a sharp right, the car tilting on its suspension, the scent of burning rubber filling the cabin. He wasn't just driving. He was trying to outrun a collapse. He diverted the flow of his path into a narrow alleyway, the brick walls scraping his side mirrors with a screech of tortured metal. The SUV overshot the turn, its tires smoking as it skidded. David didn't wait to see if they recovered. He killed his lights and glided into the darkness of a side street, his breath coming in jagged, shallow gasps. He waited for 10 minutes, the only sound the ticking of the cooling engine. He pulled out his phone and checked the GPS coordinates he'd surreptitiously pulled from Sarah's social media check-ins earlier that week. A secluded cabin, 3 miles into the woods. The drive was a slow crawl through a tunnel of pressing pines. The air grew bone-deep damp and cold, the mist clinging to his windshield like a shroud. He parked half a mile away and walked the rest of the distance, his boots crunching on the wet needles. The cabin appeared through the fog, a lonely, rotting structure that looked like a tomb forgotten by the world. David crouched behind a thick oak, his eyes scanning the perimeter. The cabin's windows were dim, lit only by the flickering orange glow of a wood stove. Then, the door creaked open. A figure stepped out into the cold. It was Maya. His daughter's shoulders were hunched, her sleeves pulled down over her palms. She looked around nervously, her lips moving in that low, haunting hum she used to drown out the world. A second later, Sarah Jenkins appeared in the doorway. Maya reached into her coat and pulled out a thick manila envelope, heavy, stuffed with the unmistakable shape of cash and documents. She handed it to Sarah. The betrayal hit David with the force of a structural failure. It wasn't just Elizabeth. It was Maya. His daughter was the courier for the woman wearing her mother's stolen jewelry. The foundation of his home wasn't just cracked. It was hollow. By the time David returned home, the house felt like a foreign country. He went straight to his study, the glass and steel surfaces reflecting his own haggard face. He sat at his desk and pulled up his corporate banking portal. He typed in his password, the keys clicking like a countdown. Access denied. He tried again, his fingers stiff with cold. Invalid credentials. He felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. He called the bank's emergency line, his voice tight. "This is David Miller. I need an immediate balance inquiry for Miller Architectural Holdings." The woman on the other end sounded bored. her voice a tinny drone. "One moment, Mr. Miller. I see. Oh. Sir, the balance is currently zero. A wire transfer for $50,000 was authorized 4 hours ago by the secondary account holder, Elizabeth Miller. She also revoked all other administrative tokens." David dropped the phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a dull thud. He was locked out. His wife hadn't just lied about a locket. She had demolished the financial walls he'd spent 20 years building. He looked at the portrait of Maya on his desk and noticed something off. A tiny, glinting circle of glass was embedded in the frame, right in the center of Maya's painted eye. A camera. He wasn't just a victim. He was a specimen under a microscope. A faint vibration hummed through the desk. It wasn't his phone. He followed the sound, his hands trembling as he reached into the ventilation duct behind his chair. His fingers brushed against cold plastic and metal. He pulled it out. A burner phone, its screen glowing with a single unread message. "The price just went up, David." From the kitchen, he heard a low, pathetic whimper. He walked down the hall to find their golden retriever, Cooper, cowering in the corner, his tail tucked between his legs. The dog refused to move, his eyes fixed on the darkened garage door. The air smelled of old gasoline and something sharper, the metallic scent of adrenaline. David grabbed a heavy metal drafting T-square from the counter, the cold steel biting into his palm. He pushed open the garage door. The space was a cavern of shadows, the low ceiling pressing down on his head. "Who's there?" David called out, his voice echoing off the concrete. The response was a blur of movement from behind the SUV. A masked figure lunged, a heavy tire iron whistling through the air. David dodged, the iron shattering the glass of a wall-mounted tool rack. He swung the T-square, the edge catching the intruder's shoulder with a sickening crack. The man grunted, a guttural, wet sound, and swung again. The iron caught David in the ribs, sending a flare of white-hot agony through his chest. He staggered back, his breath hitching, but he didn't fall. He lunged forward, using the length of the T-square to pin the man's arm against the brick wall. The intruder kicked out, catching David in the shin, and wrenched himself free. He scrambled toward the side door, disappearing into the night before David could draw another breath. David slumped against the hood of his car, the scent of stale grease thick in his nose. He was bruised, broken, and bankrupt. He knew he had to go back to the cabin. There was a leak in the logic of this entire nightmare, and the source was buried in those woods. Subverted, David drove back to the forest cabin with a grim sense of purpose. He told himself this was the smart move, the tactical strike. He had the photos of the locket, he had the record of the drained accounts, and now he had the physical evidence of an assault. If he could find the master file Sarah was using to bleed them dry, he could take it to the police and end this. He imagined the look of relief on Elizabeth's face when he told her he'd handled it. He imagined Maya finally stopping that haunting humming. He was the architect. He was going to fix the structure. He reached the cabin and found the door unlocked. The interior was sweltering, the wood stove roaring, but the air felt stagnant. He began to rifle through the desk in the corner, his fingers flying through stacks of paper. He found it, a leather-bound ledger. He opened it, expecting to find evidence of a sordid love affair between his wife and the teacher, the classic betrayal. He felt a wave of righteous confidence wash over him. He would expose their romance, file for divorce, and keep the firm. He had them. He flipped the page, his eyes scanning the entries. August 14th, $10,000. September 12th, $15,000. Beside each entry were notes in Sarah's sharp, precise handwriting. But they weren't love notes. They were descriptions of a crime. David's heart slowed. He saw a printed photo tucked into the back of the ledger. It wasn't a photo of Elizabeth and Sarah together. It was a grainy image of a dark road, a shattered headlight, and a body lying in a ditch. The truth hit him like a physical blow to the solar plexus. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a parasitic extortion scheme. Sarah Jenkins wasn't a lover. She was a predator who had witnessed Elizabeth commit a hit-and-run death a year ago. The locket hadn't been a gift. It was the first brick in a wall of silence. David felt the world tilt. He realized with a sickening jolt that Elizabeth hadn't drained the accounts to run away with Sarah. She had drained them because Sarah had demanded more maintenance for her silence. And Maya hadn't been a courier for a secret romance. She had been a witness. She had been in the car. He wasn't saving his family from a scandal. He was standing in the middle of a crime scene that had been rotting for 12 months. If he took this ledger to the police, his wife wouldn't just leave him. She would go to prison for vehicular manslaughter. And Maya, his little girl, would be charged as an accomplice to the cover-up. The smart move of finding the evidence had just handed him a live grenade with the pin already pulled. He had sought the truth to gain leverage, but the truth had just buried him alive. He sat in the cabin's icy silence, the ledger heavy in his lap. He looked at a suppressed police report Sarah had kept, a report of a John Doe found on the shoulder of Route 58. The date matched the night Elizabeth had come home, mugged. The locket was the price of a man's life. The night of the Legacy Gala arrived with a cruel irony. The country club was a palace of glass and light, filled with people in tuxedos and silk, all pretending the world wasn't a jagged place. David walked through the ballroom, the sound of clinking crystal glasses like shattering ice. He felt like a ghost haunting his own life. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The remaining emeralds by midnight, David. Or the dash cam footage goes to the precinct. Tick-tock. He saw Elizabeth across the room, wearing a high-necked gown that hid the tension in her throat. She was talking to Sarah Jenkins. To the casual observer, they looked like a parent and a concerned teacher. But David saw the way Elizabeth's fingers twitched, and the way Sarah leaned in, her eyes tracking the movement of Elizabeth's jewelry like a hawk. They weren't conspiring against him. They were drowning together. A waiter passed by, his face obscured by one of the silicone masks the club used for thematic consistency. He dropped a folded note onto David's cocktail napkin. Library. Now, David moved through the servant hallways, the air growing colder as he left the warmth of the gala. The library was a cavern of leather-bound books and shadows. The massive oil painting of the club's founder seemed to watch him with accusing eyes. "I have the jewelry," David said to the darkness. A figure stepped out from behind a bookshelf. It was the masked man from the garage, but he wasn't wearing the mask now. It was Thomas Wilson, the head of security. His face was a map of scars and resentment. "You don't have anything, Miller," Thomas spat. "You have a pile of lies." David lunged. The struggle was silent and brutal. They crashed into a mahogany table, sending a lamp shattering to the floor. David felt Thomas's fingers clawing at his throat, but he used his weight to drive the man back into a shelf. Books rained down on them. Hundreds of copies of The History of Oak Ridge. David grabbed a heavy crystal decanter and brought it down on Thomas's temple. The man slumped to the floor, blood blooming red against the white carpet. David reached into Thomas's jacket and pulled out a tablet. He swiped the screen. The video started instantly. It was dashcam footage, clear and haunting. He saw his own SUV speeding down a rain-slicked road. he saw the figure of a man step into the light. Thump. The sound was sickeningly wet. The car stopped. The driver's door opened, and Elizabeth stepped out, her face pale in the red glow of the taillights. But then the passenger door opened. Maya stepped out. She looked at the body, then at her mother. "We have to go," Elizabeth whispered on the recording. "If we stay, we lose everything." David dropped the tablet. He realized the trap was perfect. To save Maya, he had to protect Elizabeth. To protect Elizabeth, he had to become a criminal himself. He was the master of structural integrity, and he had finally found a flaw he couldn't brace. Subverted. David stood over the unconscious security chief, the flashing blue and red lights of the police cruisers already reflecting in the library windows. He had called them. He had decided to end it. He had planted the evidence of the corporate embezzlement in Thomas's locker, along with the stolen locket. He would tell the police that Thomas had been stalking his family and stealing from the firm. It was a brilliant plan, a way to remove the blackmailer and explain the missing money in one stroke. He felt a surge of cold, calculated relief. This was justice in its own twisted way. He watched as Officer Jennifer Martinez entered the room, her hand hovering over her holster. She looked at the blood, then at David. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller," she stammered, her voice trembling. Is everyone okay?" "I caught him," David said, his voice steady as a steel beam. "He's the one who's been threatening us. Look in his pocket. You'll find my wife's jewelry." Jennifer reached down, humming "Happy Birthday" under her breath as she worked. She pulled out the locket. She nodded to the other officers, who began to haul Thomas away. David stood tall, the weight lifting from his shoulders. He had won. He had saved the firm and the family. But then Jennifer stopped. She looked at the tablet lying on the floor. The screen was still glowing. She picked it up. David's breath hitched. That's firm property, evidence of his stalking. Jennifer watched the video. She watched Elizabeth hit the man. She watched Maya step out of the car. Her face went pale, then hard. She didn't look like a nervous rookie anymore. She looked like a cop. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice no longer apologizing. "This isn't stalking. This is a homicide. And you just gave me the only copy of the evidence." The subversion was total. By trying to frame Thomas for the small crime, David had hand-delivered the evidence of the great crime to the one person he couldn't control. The police weren't his tools. They were the wrecking ball. He hadn't built a foundation of lies. He had built a scaffold, and he just put the noose around his own daughter's neck. He watched as Jennifer called for backup, her eyes never leaving his. He had traded $50,000 and a locket for a life sentence for his family. The next evening, the Miller estate was silent. The air in the dining room smelled of overpowering lilies, a scent that belonged in a funeral parlor. David sat at the head of the table, meticulously cleaning the emerald locket with a soft cloth. Elizabeth sat to his left, her face a mask of frozen terror. Maya sat to his right, her low humming the only sound in the room. There were 5 places set at the table, but the 2 empty chairs seemed to hold more weight than the people. David placed the locket in the center of the table. The green stone caught the candlelight, a cold, hard eye. "The police are satisfied," David said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Thomas will be charged with the embezzlement and the stalking. The accident footage has disappeared from the evidence locker. It cost me the rest of the firm's liquidity, but the structure is stable again." He looked at Elizabeth and then at Maya. "But from now on," he continued, "we live by my blueprints. Every cent, every minute, every step you take will be counted. You wanted to keep your secrets? Fine. Now you'll keep them in the cage I've built for you. He picked up his fork and began to eat. He realized that he had achieved his dream. He had accounted for every variable. He had prevented the disaster. But as he looked at the hollow eyes of his wife and daughter, he knew the truth. He had saved the family image, but he had murdered the family. He was no longer an architect. He was a warden. And in this perfectly designed prison, he was the only one who held the keys to a house that was already dead. The only sound was the clinking of silverware and Maya's constant subsonic hum, the sound of a secret that would never, ever be free.